Hi, I'm Jay, and I use they/them pronouns. I'm coming to you from Tiohtià:ke, Montreal today. Welcome to my presentation, How Pitch, Timbre, and Visual Bias Influence Voice Categorization by cis and gender-expansive listeners. There are two overarching questions behind my research. Why do we think we can predict how people will look when we hear their voices? And why do we think we can predict how people will sound when we see how they look? I'm going to play a voice for you, and I want you to imagine the person this voice might belong to.
See the stone set in your eyes. See the thorn twist in your side.
That was the voice of Helen Lehigh, a cis woman and folk singer with a bass baritone voice. If you're surprised, you aren't alone. Gender-affirming voice researchers have identified several factors which influence voice gender perception. Today, I will be addressing pitch, resonance, which affects timbre, and physical appearance. To learn about these things, we performed 3 studies with similar protocols. In study 1, we looked at visual bias and voice classification to see if people would change their ratings of voices before and after they saw the speaker, and to see if trans people and cis people would react the same way in their judgment of voices before and after they saw the speaker. Our hypothesis was that trans people would be more aware of possible voice-body dissociations and therefore might exhibit less visual bias when judging voices. We used the RAVDES to create an online experiment in which 2 groups, cis and trans, matched on all demographics except gender identity, judged 144 samples in audio alone, video alone, and AV versions. The experiment looked and sounded like this.
Kids are talking by the door. Kids are talking by the door.
For this actor, and many others, ratings were dragged 1/3 of a step down from the A-only to the AV evaluation in the direction of the V-only rating, meaning there is AV integration and visual bias. But in general, the biases were weaker for trans folks, about 30% weaker. And we wanted to know more. So we decided to manipulate the pitch of the voices in the experiment by plus or minus 3 semitones, independent of timbre, and see what would happen. Would changing the pitch of the voices cause people to judge lower voices as more masculine or higher voices as more feminine? Would trans listeners still resist visual bias if the voices were noticeably higher or lower than in the original experiment? Like in Study 1, our participants were matched in all demographic areas. The main difference is we expanded the age range of participants in Study 2 due to the limited pool of trans participants on Prolific. The new stimuli sounded like this.
Dogs are sitting by the door. Dogs are sitting by the door. Dogs are sitting by the door.
Results showed that trans listeners in this study did not resist the visual bias as they did in Study 1. People do seem to connect pitch to voice judgments in a conscious way, but we still needed to find out what the role of timbre was in all of this. So in a 3rd study, we lengthened or shortened the vocal tract, thus changing the timbre independent of the pitch. Would changing the timbre of the voices cause people to judge darker voices, that is, those with longer vocal tract lengths, as more masculine, or brighter voices, those with shorter vocal tract lengths, as more feminine? Would trans listeners still resist visual bias if the voices were noticeably brighter or darker than in the original experiment? Here's how our new stimuli sounded.
Dogs are sitting by the door.
Dogs are sitting by the door.
Dogs are sitting by the door.
And here, we replicated the trans advantage. Trans people resisted the visual bias about 20% more than cis people. But this doesn't mean pitch is more important than timbre for signaling gender. We've all heard a cis man push his pitch up to imitate his mom, but not actually end up sounding very feminine. This is because the resonating space, the vocal tract, is wrong, and thus the timbre is wrong. What this actually means is probably that pitch is kind of in the foreground of our perception, while timbre is less understood by many people, and therefore, even though people are constantly perceiving it, they aren't always aware of how much it affects their gender perception. This is similar to what happened in the AV integration experiment, because most people don't realize how much their vision can change what they think they're hearing. Here are some selected references, and thanks so much to my lab mates and my supervisor, Michael DeRoche at Concordia. Please get in touch if you want to know more.